Okay, so another video you guys requested was Orisa. I know Orisa is a kind of a. We're gonna talk about what she feels, what role she fills, what she does, her difficulties, her abilities. We're gonna talk all about them and try to get the basics of Orisa down so that you guys can pick her up, play her, and use her effectively in a game. So Orisa fills the role of a tank. Now, we talked about off tank and main tank in the Roadhog video. So Orisa fills a main tank role just like Sigma does. However, she is much more effective at this role than I find Sigma is personally. She's a 2-star difficulty, and I would have to add another star to her to master. She's probably a 4-star difficulty to master. The way I rate these tanks is the way they play, how easy they are to pick up and learn, and the way they how fast it will take you to learn how to play them, learn how to master them. The way I look at the mastery is how well it's going to take you as the player to use all of your abilities properly so that you're getting the most effectiveness out of her. So Orisa is a 4-star on mastery, a 2-star on difficulty. She's a midway tank. So her first ability we're going to talk about is her fusion driver. Her fusion driver comes with a 150 bullet clip. It does, I believe, 3 damage per shot, and it shoots in a straight line with a light spread. So this ability will be how you're getting your ultimate charge, how you're dealing damage, how you're making sure that you can effectively help your team out by breaking shields, killing aggressive tanks, shooting enemies, trying to reposition enemies as best as you can to make them sure they're not staying in your spray of fire. The best way to do this is with any kind of tank, any kind of DPS, anybody who is a projectile fire is aim for the head. So if you're aiming for the head, you're doing double damage to that player effectively. So aiming for the head is always going to do better for you. Now, with her whole entire clip, she rarely ever has to reload. So a lot of people will continuously spray into, just to try to break a shield or just spray into a shield and not reload. My advice to you right now is always reload your gun no matter what. So if you're spraying, don't waste, 100, 10 bullets and then reload. What I'm saying is if you see your ammo reserves getting low and you see them not pushing, reload. Why waste the time? You're not wasting any time. Get that 150 bullet clip back, and when they start pushing on you, you spray again. Now, the way she went from being an extremely powerful tank to a mid range tier tank. Now, the reason for that is she got her barrier nerfed. Her barrier used to be super powerful on a short cooldown, and it used to be able to spray out. You used to be able to just keep it up almost all the time. Now, so the reason why they nerfed her is because she was extremely broken and extremely powerful. So we're gonna move on to her next ability, which is her protective barrier. Protective barrier is exactly what it sounds like. It is a shield that drops in front of you in a circle, half circle shape. It's gonna block all damage in front of you for 600 damage. So it is not a super powerful shield, but it is on a short cooldown that you can continuously use over the course of the fight. I use this shield to defend little points that my team needs to pass by. So like on Temple of Anubis, when you're attacking, you might place that down to either go right or left. Now that being said, it's not going to last long, so your team has to be ready to move with you. Another way you could use this when you're playing on defense is you pop the shield up in the air, shoot it right up in the air in front of you, and by the time it hits back down, your other barrier is up and ready to go. And you can consistently repeat this if you really want to. However, it allows you to effectively have 2 barriers ready, so you have 1200 HP ready to be blocked. 1200 damage can be blocked by your barriers if you use that ability effectively. So the way I would use the barrier personally is to either play around corners, retreating, making sure your team get through a little tiny choke point while being blocking and standing in front of your team. You want to use this barrier aggressively and defensively. When you're playing defense, you got to remember Orisa's not a lot longer the tank she was. So she's not a tank that can just sit behind her barrier and spray. No, she's got to be played safe, but she's also got to be played aggressive. So she's filled in a role of more like a passive aggressive tank, I'm going to say. She's passive when they're at range, but when they're getting closer to you, you might want to press forward and do a little bit of damage while putting your barrier behind whoever's just stepped in front of you. The reason why you want to use your barrier to do that is because any healer behind them, there's a projectile healer, so Baptiste, an Ana, a Zen, they all can't heal, and they all can't do damage to that shield. So you're effectively damaging that tank for the 600 HP. So that may last for 3 seconds. For 3 seconds, that tank is taking full damage from your whole entire team because he's got no heals because he's pressed too far. So the best way to use your protective barrier is to use it either defensively or offensively. Don't use it for both. You got to use it for one or the other. So if you're playing defensive, so like if you're on Temple and Noobs and you're holding the bridge, pop it down. It's going to be good to, soak up a little bit of damage, but you can pump out damage. But if they're pushing you and you want to play aggressive, you can use this to play aggressive. It's all on your personal playstyle because she's been filled in because of her nerfs to her barriers, nerfs in general to shields, and the nerfs she got. You're going to want to figure out a playstyle that works for you. Me personally, I like playing Orisa both passive and aggressive. I don't like playing super defensive with her because she's a very powerful tank when pressing forward. And she can work very well with a lot of the different tanks on the roster now because of the fact that she's become more like a Reinhardt with a gun. So that's her ability 1, which is on her E. Don't know what you guys have it on, but that's her ability 1. Her ability 2, which is Fortify, which is on her left shift. Whatever you guys have it on, that's up to you. Basically what happens is you start glowing. You'll hear me a lot say, "Oh, Orisa's gold in games." That's what Fortify is. She glows a little bit gold. She cannot be CC'd, stunned, put into grab bombs, put up into the air by Sigma. No CC can affect her, and she's taking reduced damage during this time. So if you're gonna press forward with your protective barrier, you're gonna want to hit left shift. So the way I like to use this ability is if I know I'm going to get a hook, they're going to try to do a hook pole combo, or they broke my shield, I know they have a Roadhog, I will stand in front of my team with my left shift so he hooks me instead. And it doesn't do anything. I don't get pulled, nothing happens. Now, the worst thing you could do with left shift is use it when it's not effective. So if you're using it like when there's no team fight going on, or you're just using it to negate like a little tiny bit of damage, it's not effective because now you've effectively wasted your biggest cooldown to reduce all the damage that you take and to stop any CC that hits you. So the best way to use this is when you're engaging other tanks, when there's DPS, jumping around your shield or whatnot, hitting you. When you're about to be CC'd by a Reinhardt or McCree or anything like that, or you're ulted by Sigma, or you're ulted by a grab, use it to get out of those and reposition yourself. However, not always the best because sometimes you let your team die in this process, and that's so it depends on the situation when you're using the left shift. Now we're gonna talk about our next ability, which is a right click. So her right click is halt. It will shoot a little orb forward, and you can either let it detonate on a wall, let it detonate when it reaches max area, or you could detonate it early when you hit right click again. The reason why you'd want to use this ability is you can reposition tanks into your line of fire. You can reposition DPS when they're trying to hide around a corner. When they're trying to get away, you can pull them back. It's effective to use as a tool to get repositions in, do a little bit of get that extra damage in from your team. Works very well with Roadhog if you guys can land your pull hook combos. It's very effective with any kind of DPS. It's great when you're I personally use this when I am playing Orisa and I don't have a Zarya, but I know my Hanzo in comp has his dragons, so I'm gonna effectively tell him to use his dragons, and I'm gonna pull them all together and watch him get shredded. It's also effective to get a quick grab. It's also effective to get an EMP. It's effective to get a barrage. It's effective for any kind of ability. It's also really good like on Ilios and stuff to pull people off maps. You can use this to pull characters off the map, pull people into the well on Ilios. Whatever, you can use this to benefit you or your team. It's a very versatile ability. It requires proper usage and knowing when to detonate. You don't want to detonate too early. Don't want to detonate behind a shield. You don't want to pull them. You got to make sure you're not pulling them into another shield, or you're not pulling them behind a shield. You want to pull them in front of the shield if you can. It's also effective when you're 1v1ing a DPS. You can actually pull them back and forth between your shield, and you can just walk back and forth. Now, her ultimate ability was Supercharger. So Supercharger is a very finicky ability because it's a stationary ability. It boosts your damage. It's great for boosting damage, but because it's such a stationary ability, any DPS can take it out if they know what they're doing. Now, the effective way to negate this is if you're playing on a payload map, you can place this on the payload with a shield and let your payload give you all the buffs while being able to pump damage. Now, that being said, is your barrier is not going to last very long, so you're going to want to stand on the payload with your Supercharger and just spray along while your DPS do their job by killing the enemy team with your supercharger. Now, another way of using this is placing it around a corner that the DPS aren't going to get to right away, and effectively using it to do damage to shields, to enemies, whatever. You want to use it effectively to where you're going to get the most use out of it. Remember, it lasts 10 seconds. I believe it's 10 seconds, and it can be killed. It only has, I believe, 300 HP, so it's not hard to kill. So you want to be very careful about where you place it, and you want to be very careful that it's not in the enemy's line of sight to where they can just 2-tap it, and you've just effectively wasted a great ult. Now, we're going to talk about using all of your abilities together. So, with your fusion driver, that's your basic damaging ability. You're going to use that with all of your abilities no matter what. Now, with your protective barrier, like we already talked, your supercharger and your protective barrier work very well together. You place your protective barrier down and you place your supercharger down right behind it and let your barrier block the damage while you stand on top of the supercharger. So you're taking damage, but you're also efficiently pumping out double damage almost. Now, the best way to use your protective barrier and halt is you can pull people through your shield, but you can't pull them through enemy shields. So what you want to do with halt is, if you place your protective barrier down, you want to back up behind that barrier sometimes and right-click past that barrier. So you can pull someone into you or you can pull someone behind you. The best way to use this combo is when you're 1v1ing an enemy player, you can actually use it to make them not be able to effectively hit you by pulling them back your shield. And then what you do is you use your shield to jump back and forth left and right. Just like you would do with Sigma, guys. You can use it here. You want to use it to stop all of the damage that you will take as much as you can. You don't want to, you don't have to use your barrier defensively. This is where you're using it offensively. Like I said, she's a passive aggressive tank. She's not 100% offense. She's not 100% defense. She's in between, just much like Sigma is, but she's not as aggressive as Sigma, I find. I find she's a very passively aggressive tank, and she needs to be used aggressively, but she also needs to be wary of what her strengths and weaknesses are. Her strengths are she's got a lot of utility to her kit. She can pump out a lot of damage with that 150 bullet clip. Her weakness, she's a slow-moving target bullet sponge just like Hog is. So you have to be careful about your positioning. You also have to be wary about your team. Now, you can use your protective barrier and halt in other ways too. So like I said, on Ilios Wells, you can use your protective barrier, you place it in front of you and use your halt to pull people in. People will come towards you if they can. They will try to get beyond the barrier if they can't blow your barrier up. Halt and forward protective barrier is more so when you're comboing them, they're used for a 1v1 fight. Now, the other ability we're going to talk about is the Fortify combos. So, Fortify combo, you can use it with your protective barrier. You place your protective barrier in front of you and you press Fortify and you walk forward while using your left click. Okay? Now, you can also use that with halt. Again, she doesn't have very many combos as a tank, but she does have some combos that will benefit you in the long run. So remember, you can also use protective barrier, fortify, and your supercharger. When you do this, always make sure you use your supercharger first. Drop your supercharger down, hit your E, and then use fortify when your shield is down. Do not use fortify while that protective barrier is up. The reason why you're doing this is so you can keep that supercharger up that extra 3 seconds. That extra 3 seconds that you can get out those extra damage bullets onto a target. Now, on top of all that, this is where you're going to use halt. You want to use halt to pull people into your bullet spray. If they're trying to run away, you're using it. You can use it on a sprinting soldier. You're using it on a running away Ana. You're using it on a running away Tracer. You're using it to reposition the target to where you're going to get the most effective damage out of your fusion driver. Remember, you have a lot of utility as Orisa, but you're not as tanky as a Rhino is, or you're not as effective as a Sigma might be in the aggressive gameplay. You want to play passive, but you also want to be aggressive. You don't want to sit on a point the whole entire time. I've watched a lot of Orisas play, and they just sit on a point and push the payload. That's not your job. Your job now is to push forward, press forward halfway. Do not go out of your line of sight of healers because you're not tanky. You're not super tanky. Do not go beyond your a barrier. So if they're playing another risk and they place a barrier behind you, you're going to want to back up behind that barrier that they just placed. And make sure you always have Fortify up for team engagements or enemy engagement. Always keep that Fortify up. It will help you out a lot if you can master her abilities and use them effectively. Now, that's all for my basic guide on Orisa. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them on the comment section, or you can message me on Discord, and I would love to hear what you guys want me to do next. Until next time, guys.